Chapter 25. Next. "I notice you have a new secretary," said Lector, as though just in passing. The arch-lector smiled.
"Of course, the old one was not to my liking. He had a loose tongue, you know."
Lector paused, his wine-glass halfway to his mouth.
"He had been passing our secrets on to the Mercers,"
continued Salt carelessly, as if it was common knowledge.
"I had been aware of it for some time. You needn't worry, though. He never learned anything I didn't want him to know."
"Then you knew who our traitor was. You knew all along." Lector's mind turned the events of the last few weeks around, pulled them apart and put them back together in this new light, trying them different ways until they fit, all the while struggling to conceal his surprise. "You left Rue's confession where you knew your secretary would see it. You knew the Mercers would find out who was on the list, and you guessed what they would do, knowing it would only play into your hands and give you the shovel with which to bury them. Meanwhile, you steered my suspicions towards K-Line, when you knew who the leak was all along. The whole business unfolded precisely according to your plan." The arch-lector was looking back at him with a knowing smile. "And I bet you guess what I'm thinking right now. I have been almost as much a piece in this game as that snivelling worm of a secretary." Lector stifled a giggle. "How fortunate for me that I was a piece on the right side. I never suspected a thing."
"He betrayed us for a disappointingly small sum of money,"
continued Salt, his lip curling with distaste.
"I dare say Colt would have given him 10 times as much if he had only had the wit to ask. The younger generation really have no ambition. They think they're a great deal cleverer than they are."
He studied Lector with his cool blue eyes. "I am part of the younger generation, more or less. I am justly humbled." "Your secretary has been disciplined?" The arch-lector placed his glass carefully down on the tabletop, the base barely making a sound on the wood.
"Oh, yes, most severely. It really isn't necessary to spare him any further thought."
"I bet it isn't. Body found floating by the docks."
"I must say, I was greatly surprised when you fixed on Superior K-Line as the source of our leak. The man was from the old guard. A few indulgences to look the other way over trifling matters, of course, but to betray the Inquisition? To sell our secrets to the Mercers?"
Salt snorted.
"Never! You allowed your personal dislike for the man to cloud your judgment."
"He seemed the only possibility," muttered Lector, but immediately regretted it. "Foolish, foolish. The mistake is made. Better just to keep your mouth shut."
"Seemed?"
The arch-lector clicked his tongue in profound disapproval.
No, Inquisitor. Seemed is not good enough for us. In future, we'll have just the facts, if you please. But don't feel too badly about it. I allowed you to follow your instincts, and, as things have turned out, your blunder has left our position much the stronger. K-Line has been removed from office."
"Body found floating."
"And Superior Goyle is on his way from Angland to assume the role of Superior of Adua."
"Goyle? Coming here? That bastard, the new Superior of Adua?" Lector could not prevent his lip from curling.
"The two of you are not the greatest of friends, eh, Lector?"
"He is a jailer, not an investigator. He is not interested in guilt or innocence. He is not interested in truth. He tortures for the thrill of it."
"Oh, come now, Lector. Are you telling me you feel no thrill when your prisoners spill their secrets? When they name the names? When they sign the confession?"
"I take no pleasure in it. I take no pleasure in anything."
"And yet you do it so very well. In any case, Goyle is coming, and whatever you may think of him, he is one of us. A most capable and trustworthy man, dedicated to the service of Crown and State. He was once a pupil of mine, you know.
Really?
Yes, he had your job. So there is some future in it after all.
The arch-lector giggled at his own joke. Glockter gave a thin smile of his own.
All in all, things have worked out very nicely, and you are to be congratulated on your part in it. A job well done.
Well enough done that I am still alive, at least. Salt raised his glass, and they drank a joyless toast together, eyeing each other suspiciously over the rims of their glasses. Glockter cleared his throat. Magister Colt mentioned something interesting before his unfortunate demise.
Go on.
The Merthers had a partner in their schemes. A senior partner, perhaps. A bank.
Ah, turn a merchant over and there's always a banker underneath. What of it?
I believe these bankers knew about it all. The smuggling, the fraud, the murders even. I believe they encouraged it, maybe ordered it, so that they could get a good return on their loans. May I begin an investigation, Your Eminence?
Which bank?
Valiant and Bulk. The arch-lector seemed to consider a moment, staring at Glockter through his hard blue eyes. Does he already know about these particular bankers? Does he already know much more than me? What did Colt say? You want traitors, Glockter? Look in the House of Questions.
No, snapped Salt. Those particular bankers are well connected. They are owed too many favours, and without Colt it would be difficult to prove anything. We got what we needed from the Mercers, and I have a more pressing task for you.
Glockter looked up. Another task. I was looking forward to interviewing the prisoners we took at the Guildhall, Your Eminence. It may be that—
No.
The arch-lector swatted Glockter's words away with his gloved hand.
That business could drag on for months. I will have Goyle handle it.
He frowned.
Unless you object.
So I plough the field, sow the seed, water the crop, then Goyle reaps the harvest. Some justice. He humbly bowed his head. Of course not, Your Eminence.
Good. You're probably aware of the unusual visitors we received yesterday.
Visitors? For the past week, Glockter had been in agony with his back. Yesterday, he had struggled out of bed to watch that cretin Luther fence, but otherwise he had been confined to his tiny room, virtually unable to move. I hadn't noticed, he said simply.
Bias, the first of the Magi.
Glockter gave his thin smile again, but the arch-lector was not laughing. You're joking, of course.
If only.
A charlatan, Your Eminence?
What else? But a most extraordinary one. Lucid, reasonable, clever. Deception is elaborate in the extreme.
You have spoken with him?
I have. He is remarkably convincing. He knows things he shouldn't know. He cannot be simply dismissed. Whoever he is, he has funding and good sources of information.
The arch-lector frowned deep.
He has some renegade brute of a Northman with him.
Glockter frowned. A Northman? It hardly seems their style. They strike me as most direct.
My very thoughts.
A spy for the Emperor, then? The Gurkish?
Perhaps. The Cantics love a good intrigue, but they tend to stick to the shadows. These theatricals don't seem to have their mark. I suspect our answer may lie closer to home.
The nobles, Your Eminence? Brock, Isher, Huygen?
Perhaps, mused Salt. Perhaps. They're annoyed enough. Or there's our old friend the High Justice. He seemed a little too pleased about it all. He's plotting something, I can tell.
The nobles, the High Justice, the Northmen, the Gurkish. It could be any one of them, or none. But why? I don't understand, Arch-Lector. If they are simply spies, why go to all this trouble? Surely there are easier ways to get into the Agriont.
This is the thing."
Salt gave as bitter a grimace as Glocter had ever seen.
"There is an empty seat on the closed council. There always has been. A pointless tradition, a matter of etiquette. A chair reserved for a mythical figure, in any case, dead for hundreds of years. Nobody ever supposed that anyone would come forward to claim it."
"But he has?"
"He has. He has demanded it."
The arch-lector got to his feet and strode around the table.
"I know! Unthinkable! Some spy, some liar from who knows where, privy to the workings of the very heart of our government. But he has some dusty papers, so it falls to us to discredit him. Can you believe it?"
Glocter could not, but there hardly seems any purpose to saying so.
"I have asked for time to investigate," continued Salt, "but the closed council will not be put off indefinitely. We have only a week or two to expose this so-called Magus for the fraud he is. In the meantime, he and his companions are making themselves at home in an excellent suite of rooms in the Tower of Chains, and there is nothing we can do to prevent them wandering the Agriont, causing whatever mischief they please."
"There is something we could do. The Tower of Chains is very high. If somebody were to fall—"
"No, not yet. We have already pushed our luck as far as it will go in certain circles. For the time being, at least, we must tread carefully."
"There is always the possibility of an interrogation. If we were to arrest them, I could soon find out who they are working for."
"Tread carefully, I said. I want you to look into this Magus, Glocter, and his companions. Find out who they are, where they come from, what they're after. Above all, find out who is behind them and why. We must discredit this would-be Bias before he can do any damage. After that, you can use whatever means you please."
Salt turned and moved away to the window. Glocter got up awkwardly, painfully from his chair. "How shall I begin?"
"Follow them!" shouted the arch-lector impatiently. "Watch them! See who they speak to, what they're about! You're the Inquisitor, Glocter!" he snapped, without even looking round. "Ask some questions!"
Chapter 26. Better Than Death.
"We're looking for a woman,"
said the officer, staring at them suspiciously.
"An escaped slave, a killer, very dangerous." "A woman, master?"
asked Yulway, his brow wrinkled with confusion.
"Dangerous, master?" "Yes, a woman."
The officer waved his hand impatiently.
"Tall, with a scar, hair cropped short, well armed, most likely with a bow."
Pharaoh stood there, tall and scarred, hair cropped short, bow over her shoulder, and looked down at the dusty ground.
"She is wanted by the highest of authorities, a thief and a murderer many times over."
Yulway gave a humble smile and spread his hands.
"We have seen no such person, master. I and my son are unarmed, as you can see."
Pharaoh looked down uncomfortably at the curved blade of the sword stuck through her belt, shining in the bright sun. The officer didn't seem to notice, though. He swatted at a fly as Yulway blathered on.
"Neither one of us would know what to do with such a thing as a bow, I can assure you. We trust in God to protect us, master, and in the Emperor's matchless soldiers."
The officer snorted.
"Very wise, old man. What's your business here?" "I am a merchant, on my way to Dugaska to purchase spices."
And he gave a grovelling bow.
"With your kind permission." "Trading with the Pinks, are you? Damn Union."
The officer spat in the dust.
"Still, a man has to make a living, I suppose, if a shameful one. Trade while you can. The Pinks will be gone soon, swept back into the ocean."
He puffed out his chest with pride.
"The Emperor, Uthman ul-Dost, has sworn it. What do you think of that, old man?" "Oh, it will be a great day, said Yulway, bowing low again. May God bring it to us soon, master.
The officer looked Pharaoh up and down.
Your son looks a strong lad. Perhaps he'd make a soldier.
He took a step towards her and grabbed hold of her bare arm.
That's a strong arm. That arm could draw a bow, I'd say, if it were taut. What do you say, boy? A man's work, fighting for the glory of God and your emperor. Better than grubbing for a pittance.
Pharaoh's flesh crawled where his fingers touched her skin. Her other hand crept towards her knife.
Alas,
said Yulwe quickly,
my son was born simple. He scarcely speaks.
Ah, a shame. The time may come when we need every man. Savages they may be, but these pinks can fight. The officer turned away, and Pharaoh scowled after him.
Very well, you may go.
He waved them on. The eyes of his soldiers, lounging in the shade of the palms around the road, followed them as they walked past, but without much interest. Pharaoh held her tongue until the encampment had dwindled into the distance behind them. Then she rounded on Yulwe.
The Goska?
To begin with,
said the old man, staring off across the scrubby plain.
And then north.
North?
Across the Circle Sea to Adua.
Across the sea? She stopped in the road.
I'm not fucking going there.
Must you make everything so difficult, Pharaoh? Are you that happy here in Gurkul?
These northerners are mad. Everyone knows it. Pinks, Union, or whatever. Mad. Godless.
Yulwe raised an eyebrow at her.
I didn't know you were so interested in God, Pharaoh.
At least I know there is one,
she shouted, pointing at the sky.
These pinks, they don't think like us, like real people. We've no business with their kind. I'd rather stay among the Gurkish. Besides, I've scores to settle here.
What scores? Going to kill Othman?
She frowned.
Perhaps I will.
Yulwe turned and headed off up the road.
They're looking for you, Pharaoh, in case you hadn't noticed. You wouldn't get 10 strides without my help. They've still got that cage waiting, remember? The one in front of the palace? They are anxious to fill it.
Pharaoh ground her teeth.
Othman is the emperor now. Uldosht, they call him. The mighty, the merciless. Greatest emperor for 100 years, they are saying already. Kill the emperor?
Yulwe chuckled to himself.
You're quite a character, all right. Quite a character.
Pharaoh scowled as she followed the old man up the hill. She wasn't looking to be anyone's character. Yulwe could make these soldiers see whatever he pleased, and that was a smart trick, but she'd be damned if she was going north. What business did she have with those godless pinks? Yulwe was still chuckling away as she drew level with him.
Kill the emperor.
He shook his head.
He'll just have to wait until you get back. You owe me, remember?
Pharaoh grabbed him by the sinewy arm.
I don't remember you saying anything about crossing the sea.
I don't remember your asking, Maljin, and you should be glad you didn't.
He peeled her fingers gently away.
Your corpse might be drying nicely in the desert, instead of grumbling in my ear, all sleek and healthy. Think on that a while.
That shut her up for the time being. She walked along in silence, scowling out across the scrubby landscape, sandals crunching on the dry dirt of the road. She looked sidelong at the old man. He'd saved her life with his tricks. That couldn't be denied. But she'd be damned if she was going north. The fortress was concealed in a rocky cove, but from where they were, high up on the bluff with the fierce sun behind them, Pharaoh could see the shape of it well enough. A high wall enclosed neat rows of buildings, enough to make a small town. Next to them, built out into the water, were long wharves. Moored to the wharves were ships. Huge ships. Towers of wood, floating fortresses. Pharaoh had never seen ships half that size. Their masts were a dark forest against the bright water behind. 10 were docked below them, and further out in the bay 2 more were cutting slowly through the waves, great sails billowing, tiny figures crawling on the decks and in amongst the spiders' webs of ropes above.
"I see 12,
murmured Yulway.
but your eyes are the sharper."
Pharaoh looked out across the water. Further round the curving shore, 20 miles away perhaps, she could see another fortress, another set of wharves.
"There are more over there," she said. 8 or 9, and those ones are bigger.
"Bigger than these?"
A lot bigger."
"God's breath,"
muttered Yulway to himself.
"The Gurkish never built ships so big before. Not half so big, nor half so many. There is not the wood in all the south for such a fleet. They must have bought it from the north, from the Styrians, maybe."
Pharaoh cared nothing for boats or wood or the north.
"So?"
"With a fleet this size, the Gurkish will be a power at sea. They could take Dagoska from the bay, invade Westport even."
The pointless names of faraway places.
"So?"
"You don't understand, Pharaoh. I must warn the others. We must make haste now."
He pushed himself up from the ground and hurried back towards the road. Pharaoh grunted. She watched the big wooden tubs moving back and forth in the bay for a moment longer, then she got up and followed Yulway. Great ships or tiny ships, it meant nothing to her. The Gurkish could take all the pinks in the world for slaves as far as she was concerned, if that meant they left the real people alone.
"Out of the way!"
The soldier spurred his horse right at them, raising his whip.
"1,000 pardons, master,"
whined Yulway, grovelling to the ground, scuttling off into the grass beside the road, pulling Pharaoh reluctantly by the elbow. She stood in the scrub, watching the columns shamble slowly by. Thin figures, ragged, dirty, vacant, hands bound tightly, hollow eyes on the ground. Men and women, all ages, children even, 100 or more. 6 guards rode alongside them, easy in their tall saddles, whips rolled up in their hands.
"Slaves."
Pharaoh licked her dry lips.
"The people of Kadir have risen up,"
said Yulway, frowning at the miserable procession.
"They wished no longer to be part of the glorious nation of Gurkul, and thought the death of the emperor might be their chance to leave. It seems they were wrong. The new emperor is harder even than the last, Pharaoh? Their rebellion has failed already. It seems your friend Uthman has taken slaves as punishment."
Pharaoh watched a scrawny girl limping slowly, bare feet trailing in the dust. 13 years old? It was hard to tell. Her face was dirty and listless. There was a scabby cut across her forehead, others on the back of her arm. Whip marks. Pharaoh swallowed, watched the girl toiling along. An old man, just in front of her, tripped and sprawled face first into the road, making the whole column stumble to a halt.
"Move!"
barked one of the riders, spurring his horse forward.
"On your feet!"
The old man struggled in the dust.
"Move!"
The soldier's whip cracked, leaving a long red mark across the man's scrawny back. Pharaoh twitched and winced at the sound, and her back began to tingle, where the scars were, almost as if she'd been whipped herself. No one whips Pharaoh Malgin and lives, not any more. She shrugged the bow off her shoulder.
"Peace, Pharaoh,"
hissed Yulway, grabbing her by the arm.
"There's nothing you can do for them."
The girl bent down, helping the old slave to his feet. The whip cracked again, catching them both, and there was a yelp of pain. Was it the girl or the man who had cried out? Or had it been Pharaoh herself? She shook Yulway's hand off, reaching for an arrow.
"I can kill this bastard,"
she snarled. The soldier's head snapped round to look at them, curious. Yulway seized hold of her hand.
"What then?"
he hissed.
"If you killed all 6 of them, what then? Have you food and water for 100 slaves, eh? You have it well concealed. And when the column is missed, eh? And their guards found slaughtered? What then, killer? Will you hide 100 slaves out here because I cannot?"
Pharaoh stared into Yulway's black eyes, her teeth grinding together, her breath snorting fast through her nose. She wondered whether or not to try and kill him again. No. He was right, damn him. Slowly she pushed the anger back, as far down as it would go. She shoved the arrow away and turned back towards the column. She watched the old slave stumble on, and the girl after him, fury gnawing at her guts like hunger. "You!" called the soldier, nudging his horse over towards them. "You've done it now," hissed Yulway. Then he bowed to the guard, smiling, scraping.
"My apologies, master. My son is—"
"Shut your mouth, old man!" The soldier looked down at Pharaoh from his saddle. "Well, boy, do you like her?" "What?" she hissed through gritted teeth.
"No need to be shy," chuckled the soldier. "I've seen you looking."
He turned towards the column.
"Hold them up there!"
he shouted, and the slave stumbled to a halt. He leaned from his saddle and grabbed the scrawny girl under the armpit, dragging her roughly out of the column.
"She's a good one,"
he said, pulling her towards Pharaoh.
"Bit young, but she's ready. Clean up nice, she will. Bit of a limp, but that'll heal. We've been driving 'em hard. Good teeth. Show 'em your teeth, bitch."
The girl's cracked lips curled back slowly.
"Good teeth. What do you say, boy? 10 in gold for her. It's a good price."
Pharaoh stood there, staring. The girl looked dumbly back, with big, dead eyes.
"Look,"
said the soldier, leaning down from his saddle. "She's worth twice that, and there's no danger in it. When we get to Shaffa, I'll tell them she died out here in the dust. No one will wonder at that, it happens all the time. I get 10, and you save 10. Everyone wins." Everyone wins. Pharaoh stared up at the guard. He pulled his helmet off, wiped his forehead with the back of his hand.
"Peace, Pharaoh,"
whispered Yulway.
"All right, 8, shouted the soldier. "She's got a nice smile. Show him a smile, bitch."
The corner of the girl's mouth twitched slightly.
"There, see? 8, and you're stealing from me."
Pharaoh's fists were clenched, nails digging into her palms.
"Peace, Pharaoh,"
whispered Yulway, with a warning note in his voice.
"God's teeth, but you drive a bargain, boy. 7, and that's my last offer. 7, damn it."
The soldier waved his helmet around in frustration.
"Use her gently. In 5 years she'll be worth more. It's an investment."
The soldier's face was just a few feet away. She could see each tiny bead of sweat forming on his forehead, each stubbly hair on his cheeks, each blemish, nick and pore on his skin. She could smell him almost. The truly thirsty will drink piss or salt water or oil, however bad for them, so great is their need to drink. Pharaoh had seen it often in the Badlands. That was the extent of her need to kill this man now. She wanted to tear him with her bare hands, to choke the life from him, to rip his face with her teeth. The desire was almost too strong to resist.
"Peace,"
hissed Yulway. "I can't afford her," Pharaoh heard herself saying.
"You might have said so before, boy, and saved me the trouble."
The soldier stuck his helmet back on.
"Still, I can't blame you for looking. She's a good one."
He reached down and grabbed the girl under the arm, dragging her back towards the others.
"They'll get 20 for her in Shaffa,"
he shouted over his shoulder. The column moved on. Pharaoh watched the girl until the slaves disappeared over a rise, stumbling, limping, shambling towards slavery. She felt cold now, cold and empty. She wished she had killed the guard, whatever the cost. Killing him could have filled that empty space, if only for a while. That was how it worked. "I walked in a column like that," she said slowly. Yulway gave a long sigh.
"I know, Pharaoh, I know. But fate has chosen you for saving. Be grateful for it, if you know how."
You should have let me kill him.
Ah, clucked the old man in disgust. I do declare you'd kill the whole world if you could. Is there anything but killing in you, Pharaoh?
There used to be, she muttered. But they whip it out of you. They whip you until they're sure there's nothing left.
Yulway stood there with that pitying look on his face. Strange how it didn't make her angry anymore. I'm sorry, Pharaoh. Sorry for you and for them. He stepped back into the road, shaking his head. But it's better than death. She stayed for a moment, watching the dust rising from the distant column.
The same,
she whispered to herself. Chapter 27. Sore Thumb. Logan leaned against the parapet, squinted into the morning sun, and took in the view. He'd done the same, it felt long ago now, from the balcony of his room at the library. The two views could hardly have been more different. Sunrise over the jagged carpet of buildings on the one hand, hot and glaring bright and full of distant noise. The cold and misty valley on the other, soft and empty and still as death. He remembered that morning, remembered how he'd felt like a different man. He certainly felt a different man now, a stupid man, small, scared, ugly, and confused.
Logan?
Magus stepped out onto the balcony to stand beside him, smiled up at the sun and out over the city to the sparkling bay, already busy with ships.
Beautiful, isn't it?
If you say so. But I'm not sure I see it.
All those people.
Logan gave a sweaty shiver. It's not right. It frightens me.
Frightened? You?
Always. Logan had barely slept since they arrived. It was never properly dark here, never properly quiet. It was too hot, too close, too stinking. Enemies might be terrifying, but enemies could be fought and put an end to. Logan could understand their hatred. There was no fighting the faceless, careless, rumbling city. It hated everything. This is no place for me. I'll be glad to leave.
We might not be leaving for a while.
I know. Logan took a deep breath. That's why I'm going to go down and look at this Agriont and find out what I can about it. Some things have to be done. It's better to do them than to live with the fear of them. That's what my father used to tell me.
Good advice. I'll come with you.
You will not. Baez was in the doorway, glaring out at his apprentice. Your progress over the last few weeks has been a disgrace, even for you. He stepped through into the open air. I suggest that while we are idle, waiting on His Majesty's pleasure, you should take the opportunity to study. Another such chance may be a long time coming. Magus hurried back inside with no backward glances. He knew better than to dawdle with his master in this mood. Baez had lost all his good humour as soon as they arrived at the Agriont, and it didn't look like coming back. Logan could hardly blame him. They'd been treated more like prisoners than guests. He didn't know much about manners, but he could guess the meaning of hard stares from everyone and guards outside the door.
You wouldn't believe how it's grown,
growled Baez, frowning out at the great sweep of city.
I remember when Azure was barely more than a huddle of shacks squeezed in round the house of the Maker like flies round a fresh turd. Before there was an Agriont, before there was a union even. They weren't half so proud in those days, I can tell you. They worshipped the Maker like a god.
He noisily hawked up a lump of phlegm and spat it out into the air. Logan watched it clear the moat and vanish somewhere in amongst the white buildings below.
I gave them this,
hissed Baez. Logan felt the unpleasant, creeping sensation that always seemed to accompany the old wizard's displeasure.
I gave them freedom, and this is the thanks I get? The scorn of clerks, of swollen-headed old errand boys?
A trip down into the suspicion and madness below began to seem like a merciful release. Logan edged towards the door and ducked back into the room beyond. If they were prisoners here, then Logan had been in some harder cells, he had to admit. Their round living room was fit for a king, to his mind at least. Heavy chairs of dark wood with delicate carvings, thick hangings on the walls showing woods and hunting scenes. Bethard would most likely have felt at home in such a room. Logan felt like an oaf there, always on his toes in case he broke something. A tall jar stood on a table in the chamber's centre, its sides painted with bright flowers. Logan eyed it suspiciously as he made for the long stair down into the Agriont.
"Logan!"
Magus was framed in the doorway, frowning after him.
"Take care. The place may seem strange, but the people are stranger still."
The water frothed and gurgled, spurting up in a narrow jet from a metal tube carved like a fish's mouth, then splashing back down into a wide stone basin. A fountain, the proud young man had called it. Pipes beneath the earth, he'd said. Logan pictured underground streams coursing just beneath his feet, washing at the foundations of the place. The thought made him feel slightly dizzy. The square was vast, a great plain of flat stones hemmed in by sheer cliffs of white buildings. Hollow cliffs covered with pillars and carvings, glittering with tall windows, crawling with people. Something strange seemed to be happening today. All around the distant edges of the square, an enormous sloping structure of wooden beams was being built. An army of workmen swarmed over it, hacking and bludgeoning, swinging at pegs and joints, hurling bad-tempered shouts at each other. All around them were mountains of planks and logs, barrels of nails, stacks of tools, enough to build 10 mighty halls and more besides. In places, the structure was already far above the ground, its uprights soaring into the air like the masts of great ships, as high as the monstrous buildings behind. Logan stood, hands on hips, gawping at the enormous wooden skeleton, but its purpose was a mystery. He stepped up to a short, muscular man in a leather apron, sawing furiously at a plank. "What's this?" "Eh?" The man didn't even look up from his task. "This, what's it for?" The saw bit through the wood, the offcut clattered to the ground. The carpenter hefted the rest of the plank onto a pile nearby. He turned round, eyeing Logan suspiciously, wiping sweat from his glistening forehead. "Stands. Seating." Logan stared vacantly back at him. How could something stand and sit at once? "For the contest!" the carpenter shouted in his face. Logan backed slowly away. Gibberish. Nonsense words. He turned and hurried off, keeping well clear of the huge wooden structures and the men clambering over them. He blundered out onto a broad lane, a deep gorge between looming white buildings. Statues faced each other down either side, much larger than life, frowning over the heads of the many people hurrying between. The nearest of the carvings seemed strangely familiar. Logan walked over to it, looked it up and down, then grinned to himself. The first of the Magi had gained some weight since it was sculpted. Too much good eating at the library, maybe. Logan turned towards a small man with a black hat, walking by with a big book under his arm. "Bias," he said, pointing up at the statue. "Friend of mine." The man stared at him, at the statue, back at him, and hurried away. The carvings marched on down either side of the avenue. Kings of the Union, Logan guessed, stood in line on the left. Some carried swords, some scrolls or tiny ships. One had a dog at his feet, another a sheaf of wheat under his arm, but otherwise there wasn't much to tell them apart. They all had the same tall crowns and the same stern frowns. You wouldn't have thought to look at them that they'd ever said a stupid word or done a stupid thing or had to take a shit in all their lives. Logan heard rapid footsteps thumping up behind him, and he turned just in time to see the proud young man from the gate pounding down the avenue, shirt soaked through with sweat. Logan wondered where he might be going in such a hurry, but he was damned if he was going to run to catch up with him, not in this heat. Anyway, there were plenty more mysteries that needed solving. The lane opened out into a great green space, scooped out from the country by giant hands and dropped in amongst the tall buildings, but like no countryside that Logan had ever seen. The grass was a smooth, even blanket of vivid green, shaved almost to the ground. There were flowers, but growing in rows and circles and straight lines of bright colour. There were lush bushes and trees, all squeezed and fenced and clipped into unnatural shapes. There was water, too, streams bubbling over stone steps, a great flat pond with sad-looking trees trailing round its edge. Logan wandered through this square-edged greenery, boots crunching on a path made of tiny grey stones. There were lots of people gathered here, squeezed in together to enjoy the sun. They sat in boats on the miniature lake, rowing gently round and round, going nowhere. They lazed on the lawns, ate, drank, and babbled to one another. Some of them would point at Logan and shout, or whisper, or slope away. They were a strange-seeming crowd, especially the women. Pale and ghostly, swaddled in elaborate dresses, hair scraped up and piled and stuck through with pins and combs and great weird feathers or useless tiny hats. They seemed like the big jar in the round chamber, too thin and delicate to be any use, and further spoiled by too much decoration. But it had been a long time, and he smiled at them cheerfully on the off chance. Some looked shocked, others gasped in horror. Logan sighed. The old magic was still there. Further on, in another wide square, Logan stopped to watch a group of soldiers practice. These weren't beggars or girlish youths. These were solid-looking men wearing heavy armour, breastplates, and greaves polished mirror-bright, long spears shouldered. They stood together, each man the same as the one beside, in 4 squares of maybe 50 men each, still as the statues in the avenue. At a bellow from a short man in a red jacket, their chief, Logan reckoned, the whole crowd turned, levelled their spears, and began to advance across the square, heavy boots tramping together. Each man the same, armed the same, moving the same. It was quite a sight, all that shining metal moving steadily in bristling squares, spear points glittering, like some great square hedgehog with 200 legs. Deadly enough, no doubt, on a big flat space, against an imaginary enemy right in front. How it would work on broken rocks, in the tipping rain, in a tangled wood, Logan was less sure. Those men would tire quickly in all that weight of armour, and if the squares could be broken, what would they do? Men who were used to always having others at their shoulder, could they fight alone? He plodded on, through wide courtyards and neat gardens, past gurgling fountains and proud statues, down clean lanes and broad avenues. He wandered up and down narrow stairways, across bridges over streams, over roads, over other bridges. He saw guards in a dozen different splendid liveries, guarding 100 different gates and walls and doors, every one eyeing him with the same deep suspicion. The sun climbed in the sky, the tall white buildings slid by, until Logan was footsore and half lost, his neck aching from looking always upwards. The only constant was the monstrous tower which loomed high, high over everything else, making the greatest of the great buildings seem mean. It was always there, glimpsed out of the corner of your eye, peering over the tops of the roofs in the distance. Logan's footsteps dragged him slowly closer and closer to it, until he came to a neglected corner of the citadel in its very shadow. He found an old bench beside a ragged lawn near a great crumbling building coated with moss and ivy, its steep roofs sagging in the middles and missing tiles. He slumped down, puffing out his cheeks, and frowned up at that enormous shape beyond the walls, cut out dark against the blue, a man-made mountain of dry, stark, dead stones. No plants clung to that looming mass, not even a clump of moss in the cracks between the great blocks. The House of the Maker, Bias had called it. It looked like no house that Logan had ever seen. There were no roofs above, no doors or windows in those naked walls. A cluster of mighty, sharp-edged tiers of rock. What need could there ever be to build a thing so big? Who was this Maker, anyway? Was this all he made? A great, big, useless house? "You mind if I sit?" There was a woman looking down at Logan, more what he would have called a woman than those strange, ghostly things in the park. A pretty woman, in a white dress, face framed by dark hair. "Do I mind? No. It's a funny thing, but no one else wants to sit with me." She dropped down at the far end of the bench, resting her chin on her hands, her elbows on her knees, gazing up without interest at the looming tower. "Perhaps they're afraid of you." Logan watched a man hurry past with a sheaf of papers under his arm, staring at him with wide eyes. "I'm starting to think the same thing. You do look a little dangerous." "Hideous is the word you're looking for." "I usually find the words I'm looking for, and I say dangerous." "Well, looks can lie." She lifted an eyebrow, looking him slowly up and down. "You must be a man of peace, then." "Not entirely." They looked at each other sidelong. She didn't seem afraid, or scornful, or even interested. "Why aren't you scared?" "I'm from Angland. I know your people. Besides," and she let her head drop onto the back of the bench, "no one else will talk to me. I'm desperate." Logan stared at the stump of his middle finger, waggled it back and forth as far as it would go. "You'd have to be. I'm Logan." "Good for you. I'm nobody." "Everybody's somebody." "Not me. I'm nothing. I'm invisible." Logan frowned at her, turned sideways to him, lounging back on the bench in the sun, her long, smooth neck stretched out, chest rising and falling gently. "I see you." She rolled her head to look at him. "You are a gentleman." Logan snorted with laughter. He'd been called a lot of things in his time, but never that. The young woman didn't join him in his amusement. "I don't belong here," she muttered to herself. "Neither one of us." "No, but this is my home." She got up from the bench. "Goodbye, Logan." "Fare you well, nobody." He watched her turn and walk slowly away, shaking his head. Bias had been right. The place was strange, but the people were stranger still. Logan woke with a painful start, blinked, and stared wildly about him. Dark. Not quite entirely dark, of course. There was still the ever-present glow of the city. He thought he'd heard something, but there was nothing now. It was hot and close and strangling, even with the sticky draught from the open window. He groaned, threw the damp blankets down around his waist, rubbed the sweat from his chest, and wiped it on the wall behind him. The light nagged at his eyelids, and that was not the worst of his problems. Say one thing for Logan Ninefingers, say that he needs to piss. Unfortunately, you couldn't just piss in a pot in this place. They had a special thing, like a flat wooden shelf with a hole in it in a little room. He'd peered down into that hole when they first arrived, wondering what it could be for. It seemed like a long way down, and it smelled bad. Magus had explained it to him. A pointless and barbaric invention. You had to sit there on the hard wood an unpleasant draught blowing round your fruits. But that was civilization, as far as Logan could tell. People with nothing better to do, dreaming up ways to make easy things difficult. He floundered out of bed and picked his way to where he remembered the door being, bent over with his arms feeling about in front of him. Too light to sleep, but too dark to actually see anything. Fucking civilization, he muttered to himself as he fumbled with the latch on the door, sliding his bare feet cautiously into the big circular room at the centre of their chambers. It was cool in here, very cool. The cold air felt good on his bare skin after the damp heat of his bedroom. Why wasn't he sleeping in here instead of that oven next door? He squinted at the shadowy walls, face all screwed up with the painful fuzz of sleep, trying to work out which blurry door led to the pissing shelf. Knowing his luck, he'd probably blunder into Baez's room and accidentally piss on the first of the Magi while he was asleep. That would be just the thing to sweeten the wizard's temper. He took a step forward. There was a clunk and a rattle as his leg barged into the corner of the table. He cursed, grabbing at his bruised chin. Then he remembered the jar. He lunged and caught it by the rim just before it fell. His eyes were adjusting to the half-light now, and he could just make out the flowers painted on the cold, shiny surface. He moved to put it back on the table, but then it occurred to him. Why go any further when he had a perfectly good pot right there? He glanced furtively round the room, swinging the jar into position, then froze. He was not alone. A tall, slender figure, vague in the half-light. He could just make out long hair, blowing gently in the breeze from the open window. He strained against the darkness, but he couldn't see the face. Logan. A woman's voice, soft and low. He didn't like the sound of it one bit. It was cold in the room, very cold. He took a firm grip on the jar. "Who are you?" he croaked, voice suddenly loud in the dead stillness. Was he dreaming? He shook his head, squeezed the jar in his hand. It all felt real, horribly real. Logan. The woman moved silently towards him. Soft light from the window caught the side of her face. A white cheek, a shadowy eye socket, the corner of a mouth, then sunk in darkness again. There was something familiar. Logan's mind fumbled for it as he backed away, eyes fixed on her outline, keeping the table between them. "What do you want?" He had a cold feeling in his chest, a bad feeling. He knew he should be shouting for help, raising the others, but somehow he had to know who it was, had to know. The air was freezing. Logan could almost see his breath smoking before his face. His wife was dead. He knew that. Dead and cold and gone back to the mud long ago and far away. He'd seen the village, burned to ashes, full of corpses. His wife was dead, and yet... "Selfie," he whispered. "Logan." Her voice. Her voice. His mouth dropped open. She reached out for him through the light from the window. Pale hand, pale fingers, long white nails. The room was icy, icy cold. "Logan, you're dead." He raised the jar, ready to smash it down on her head. The hand reached out, fingers spreading wide. Suddenly, the room was bright as day. Brighter, brilliant, searing bright. The murky outlines of the doors, the furniture, were transformed into hard white edges, black shadows. Logan squeezed his eyes shut, shielded them with his arm, dropped back, gasping against the wall. There was a deafening crash like a landslide, a tearing and splintering like a great tree falling, a stink of burning wood. Logan opened one eye a crack, peered out from between his fingers. The chamber was strangely altered. Dark, once more, but less dark than before. Light filtered in through a great ragged hole in the wall where the window used to be. 2 of the chairs had gone. A third teetered on 3 legs, broken edges glowing faintly, smouldering like sticks that had been a long time in a fire. The table, standing right beside him just a moment before, was sheared in half on the other side of the room. Part of the ceiling had been torn away from the rafters, and the floor was littered with chunks of stone and plaster, broken lengths of wood, and fragments of glass. Of the strange woman there was no sign. Baez picked his way unsteadily through the wreckage towards the gaping hole in the wall, nightshirt flapping around his thick calves, and peered out into the night.
"It's gone."
"It?" Logan stared at the steaming hole. "She knew my name." The wizard stumbled over to the last remaining intact chair and flung himself into it like a man exhausted.
"An eater, perhaps, sent by Khalul."
"A what?" asked Logan, baffled. "Sent by who?" Baez wiped sweat from his face.
"You wanted not to know."
"That's true." Logan couldn't deny it. He rubbed at his chin, staring out of the ragged patch of night sky, wondering whether now might be a good time to change his mind. But by then it was too late. There was a frantic hammering at the door.
"Get that, would you?"
Logan stumbled stupidly through the debris and slid back the bolt. An angry-looking guard shouldered his way past, a lamp in one hand, drawn sword in the other. "There was a noise!" The light from his lamp swept over the wreckage, found the ragged edge of the ripped plaster, the broken stone, the empty night sky beyond. "Shit!" he whispered. "We had an uninvited guest," muttered Logan. I must notify—" The guard looked thoroughly confused. "Somebody—" He tripped and nearly fell over a fallen beam as he backed towards the door. Logan heard his footsteps rattling away down the stairs. "What's an eater?" There was no reply. The wizard was asleep, eyes closed, a deep frown on his face, chest moving slowly. Logan looked down. He was surprised to see he still had the pot, beautiful and delicate, clasped tightly in his right hand. He carefully swept clear a space on the floor and set the jar down in amongst the wreckage. One of the doors banged open, and Logan's heart jumped. It was Magus, wild-eyed and staring, hair sticking up off his head at all angles. "What the—" He stumbled to the hole and peered gingerly out into the night. "Shit!" "Magus, what's an eater?" Quai's head snapped round to look at Logan, his face a picture of horror. "It's forbidden," he whispered, "to eat the flesh of men." Chapter 28. Questions. Lector heaped porridge into his mouth as fast as he could, hoping to get half a meal's worth down before his gorge began to rise. He swallowed, coughed, shuddered. He shoved the bowl away as though its very presence offended him, which, in fact, it does. "This had better be important, Everard," he grumbled. The practical scraped his greasy hair back with one hand. "Depends what you mean by important. It's about our magical friends." "Ah, the first of the Magi and his bold companions. What about them?" "There was some manner of a disturbance at their chambers last night. Someone broke in, they say. There was a fight of some sort. Seems as if damage was done." "Someone? Some sort? Some damage?" Lector gave a disapproving shake of his head. Seems isn't good enough for us, Everard." "Well, it will have to be this time. The guard was a little thin on the details. Looked damn worried, if you ask me." Everard sprawled a little deeper into his chair, shoulders hunching up around his ears. "Someone needs to go and look into it. Might as well be us. You can get a good look at them close up. Ask them some questions, maybe." "Where are they?" "You'll love this. The Tower of Chains."
Glockter scowled as he sucked a few bits of porridge from his empty gums. Of course. And right at the top, I bet. Lots of steps. Anything else? The Northman went for a stroll yesterday, walked in circles round half the Agriont. We watched him, of course. The practical sniffed and adjusted his mask. Ugly bastard. Ah, the infamous Northman. Did he commit any outrages? Rape and murder? Building the flame? That type of thing? Not much, being honest. A tedious morning for everyone. Wandered around and gawped at things. He spoke to a couple of people. Anyone we know? No one important. One of the carpenters working on the stands for the contest. A clerk on the Kingsway. There was some girl near the university. Spoke to her for a while. A girl? Severad's eyes grinned. That's right. A nice-looking one, too. What was her name? He snapped his fingers. I made sure I found it out. Her brother's with the King's Own. West. Something West. Ardy. That's the one. You know her. Glockter licked at his empty gums. She asked me how I was, I remember. What did they have to talk about? The practical raised his eyebrows. Probably nothing. She's from Angland, though, not been in the city long. Might be some connection. You want me to bring her in? We could soon find out. No, snapped Glockter. No need. Her brother used to be a friend of mine. Used to be. No one touches her, Theverard, you hear? The practical shrugged. If you say so, Inquisitor. If you say so. I do. There was a pause. So, we're done with the Mercers then, are we? Severard sounded almost wistful. It would seem so. They're finished. Nothing but some cleaning up to do. Some lucrative cleaning up, I dare say. I dare say, said Glockter sourly. But His Eminence feels our talents will be better used elsewhere. Like watching fake wizards. Hope you didn't lose out on your little property by the docks. Severard shrugged. I wouldn't be surprised if you need somewhere away from prying eyes again before too long. It'll still be there, at the right price. Shame to leave a job half done is all. True. Glockter paused for a moment, considering. Dangerous. The Arch-Lector said go no further. Very dangerous to disobey, and yet I smell something. It niggles to leave a loose end, whatever His Eminence might say. There might be one more thing. Really? Yes, but keep it subtle. Do you know anything about banks? Big buildings. They lend people money. Glockter gave a thin smile. I had no idea you were such an expert. There's one in particular I'm interested in. Name of Valiant and Wotlk. Never heard of them, but I can ask around. Just keep it discreet, Severard. You understand me? No one can know about this. I mean it. Discretion is what I'm all about, Chief. Ask anyone. Discreet, that's me. Known for it. You'd better be, Severard. You had better be. Or it could be both our heads. Glockter sat, wedged into the embrasure, with his back against the stones and his left leg stretched out in front of him, a searing, pulsing furnace of pain. He expected pain, of course, every moment of every day. But this is something just a bit special. Every breath was a rattling moan through rigid jaws. Every tiniest movement was a mighty task. He remembered how Marshal Varuz had made him run up and down these steps when he was training for the contest years ago. I took them 3 at a time, up and down without a second thought. Now look at me. Who would have thought it could come to this? His trembling body ran with sweat, his stinging eyes ran with tears, his burning nose dripped watery snot. All this water flowing out of me and yet I'm thirsty as hell. Where's the sense in that? Where was the sense in any of it? What if someone should come past and see me like this? The terrifying scourge of the Inquisition, flopped on his ass in a window, barely able to move? Will I force a nonchalant smile onto this rigid mask of agony? Will I pretend that all is well? That I often come here to sprawl beside the stairs? Or will I weep and scream and beg for help? But no one passed. He lay there, wedged in that narrow space, 3/4 of the way up the Tower of Chains, the back of his head resting on the cool stones, his trembling knees drawn up in front of him. Sant Dan Glocta, master swordsman, dashing cavalry officer, what glorious future might he have in front of him? There was a time when I could run for hours, run and never tire. He could feel a trickle of sweat running down his back. Why do I do this? Why the hell would anyone do this? I could stop today. I could go home to Mother. But then what? Then what?
Inquisitor, I'm glad you're here.
Good for you, bastard. I'm not.
Glocta leaned against the wall at the top of the stairs, such teeth as he had grinding against his gums. They're inside. It's quite a mess. Glocta's hand trembled, the tip of his cane rattling against the stones. His head swam. The guard was blurry and dim through his twitching eyelids. Are you all right? He loomed forwards, one arm outstretched. Glocta looked up.
Just get the fucking door, fool.
The man jumped away, hurried to the door, and pushed it open. Every part of Glocta longed to give up and sprawl on his face, but he willed himself upright. He forced one foot before the other, forced his breath to come even, forced his shoulders back and his head high, and swept imperiously past the guard, every part of his body singing with pain. What he saw beyond the doors almost broke his veneer of composure, however.
Yesterday, these were some of the finest rooms in the Agriont. They were reserved for the most honored of guests, the most important of foreign dignitaries. Yesterday, a gaping hole was ripped out of one wall where the window should have been, the sky beyond, blinding bright after the darkness of the stairwell. A section of the ceiling had collapsed, broken timbers and shreds of plaster hanging down into the room. The floor was strewn with chunks of stone, splinters of glass, torn fragments of coloured cloth. The antique furniture had been smashed to scattered pieces, broken edges charred and blackened as if by fire. Only one chair, half a table, and a tall ornamental jar, strangely pristine in the middle of the rubble-strewn floor, had escaped the destruction. In the midst of this expensive wreckage stood a confused and sickly-seeming young man. He looked up as Glocta picked his way through the rubble round the doorway, tongue darting nervously over his lips, evidently on edge. Has anyone ever looked more of a fraud?
Good morning. The young man's fingers twitched nervously at his gown, a heavy thing stitched with arcane symbols.
And doesn't he look uncomfortable in it? If this man is a wizard's apprentice, I am the Emperor of Gurkle. I am Glocta, from His Majesty's Inquisition. I have been sent to investigate this unfortunate business.
I was expecting someone older.
Oh, yes, sorry, I am Malachus Quai, stammered the young man, apprentice to great buyers, the first of the Magi, great in high art and learned in deep... Kneel before me. I am the mighty Emperor of Gurkle. Malachus! Glocta cut him off rudely. Quai! You are from the old empire?
Why, yes. The young man brightened slightly at that. Do you know my...
No, not at all. The pale face sagged. "Were you here last night?" Yes. I was asleep next door. I'm afraid I didn't see anything, though." Gloctor stared at him, intent and unblinking, trying to work him out. The apprentice coughed and looked at the floor, as if wondering what to clean up first. Can this really make the arch-lector nervous? A miserable actor? His whole manner reeks of deception. Someone saw something, though. "Well, Master Ninefingers, I suppose." "Ninefingers?" "Yes, our northern companion." The young man brightened. "A warrior of great renown, a champion, a prince among his—" "You, from the old empire, he, a Northman. What a cosmopolitan band you are." "Well, yes, we do, I suppose." "Where is Ninefingers now?" "Still asleep, I think. I could wake him." "Would you be so kind?" Gloctor tapped his cane on the floor. "It was quite a climb, and I would rather not come back later." "No, of course, sorry." He hastened over to one of the doors, and Gloctor turned away, pretending to examine the gaping wound in the wall, while grimacing in agony and biting his lip to keep from wailing like a sick child. He seized hold of the broken stones at the edge of the hole with his free hand, squeezing them as hard as he could. As the spasm passed, he began to take more interest in the damage. Even this high up, the wall was a good 4 feet thick, solidly built from rubble bonded with mortar, faced with cut stone blocks. It would take a rock from a truly mighty catapult to make such a breach, or a team of strong workmen going night and day for a week. A giant siege engine, or a group of labourers, would doubtless have attracted the attention of the guards. So how was it made? Gloctor ran his hand over the cracked stones. He had once heard rumours that in the far south they made a kind of blasting powder. Could a little powder have done this? The door opened, and Gloctor turned to see a big man ducking under the low lintel, buttoning his shirt with slow, heavy hands, a thoughtful kind of slowness, as if he could move quickly but doesn't see the point. His hair was a tangled mass, his lumpy face badly scarred. The middle finger of his left hand was missing. Hence 9 fingers. How very imaginative. "Sleeping late?" The Northman nodded. "Your city is too hot for me. It keeps me up at night and makes me sleepy in the day." Gloctor's leg was throbbing, his back was groaning, his neck was stiff as a dry branch. It was all he could do to keep his agony a secret. He would have given anything to sprawl in that one undamaged chair and scream his head off. But I must stand and trade words with these charlatans. "Could you explain to me what happened here?" 9 fingers shrugged. "I needed to piss in the night. I saw someone in the room." He had little trouble with the common tongue, it seemed, even if the content was hardly polite. "Did you see who this someone was?" "No. It was a woman, I saw that much." He worked his shoulders, clearly uncomfortable. "A woman? Really?" This story becomes more ridiculous by the second. "Anything else? Can we narrow our search beyond half the population?" "It was cold. Very cold." "Cold?" Of course, why not, on one of the hottest nights of the year? Gloctor stared into the Northman's eyes for a long time, and he stared back. Dark, cool blue eyes, deeply set. Not the eyes of an idiot. He may look an ape, but he doesn't talk like one. He thinks before he speaks, then says no more than he has to. This is a dangerous man. "What is your business in the city, Master 9 fingers?" "I came with Baez. If you want to know his business, you can ask him. Honestly, I don't know." He pays you, then? No. You follow him out of loyalty? Not exactly. But you are his servant? No, not really. The Northman scratched slowly at his stubbly jaw. I don't know what I am. A big, ugly liar is what you are, but how to prove it? Gloctor waved his cane around the shattered chamber. How did your intruder cause so much damage? Bias did that. He did? How? Art, he calls it. Art? Base magic is wild and dangerous, intoned the apprentice pompously, as though he were saying something of great importance. For it comes from the other side, and to touch the world below is fraught with peril. The Magus tempers magic with knowledge, and thus produces high art, but like the smith or the other side, snapped Gloctor, putting a sharp end to the young moron's stream of drivel. The world below? Hell, do you mean? Magic? Do you know any magic, Master Ninefingers? Me? The Northman chuckled. No. He thought about it for a moment, and then added, almost as an afterthought, I can speak to the spirits, though. The spirits? Is that so? For pity's sake. Perhaps they could tell us who this intruder was. I'm afraid not. Ninefingers shook his head sadly, either missing Gloctor's sarcasm or choosing to ignore it. There are none left awake in this place. They're sleeping here. They have been for a long time. Ah, of course. Well past spirit's bedtime. I tire of this nonsense. You come from Bethod? You could say that. It was Gloctor who was surprised. He had expected at best a sharp intake of breath, a hurried effort at concealment, not a frank admission. Ninefingers did not even blink, however. I was once his champion. Champion? I fought 10 duels for him. Gloctor groped for words. Did you win? I was lucky. You realize, of course, that Bethod have invaded the Union. I do. Ninefingers sighed. I should have killed that bastard long ago, but I was young then and stupid. Now I doubt I'll get another chance, but that's the way of things. You have to be... what's the word for it? Realistic, said Quai. Gloctor frowned. A moment ago he had teetered on the brink of making sense of all this nonsense, but the moment had slipped away, and things made less sense than ever. He stared at Ninefingers, but that scarred face held no answers, only more questions. Talking with spirits? Bethod's champion but his enemy? Assaulted by a mysterious woman in the dead of night? And he doesn't even know why he's here? A clever liar tells as much truth as he can, but this one tells so many lies I hardly know where to begin. Ah, we have a guest. An old man stepped into the room, thick-set and stocky, with a short grey beard, vigorously rubbing his bald head with a cloth. So this is Bias. He threw himself down in the one intact chair, moving with none of the grace one would expect from an important historical figure. I must apologize. I was taking advantage of the bath. A very fine bath. I have been bathing every day since we arrived here at the Agriont. I grew so besmirched with the dirt of the road that I have positively seized upon the opportunity to be clean again. The old man rubbed his hand over his hairless scalp with a faint hissing sound. Gloctor mentally compared his features to those of Bias's statue in the Kingsway. There is hardly anything uncanny about the resemblance. Half as commanding and a great deal shorter. Given an hour, I could find 5 old men who looked more convincing. If I took a razor to Arch-Lector's salt, I could do better. Gloctor glanced at his shiny pate. I wonder if he takes a razor to that every morning. And you are? Asked the supposed Bias. Inquisitor Gloctor. "Ah, one of His Majesty's Inquisitors. We are honoured." "Oh no, the honour is mine. You, after all, are the legendary Bias, first of the Magi." The old man glared back at him, his green eyes prickly hard. "Legendary is perhaps a shade too much, but I am Bias. Your companion, Master Ninefingers, was just describing last night's events to me. A colourful tale. He claims that you caused all this." The old man snorted. "I am not in the habit of welcoming uninvited guests." "So I see. Alas, there was some damage to the suite. In my experience, one should act quickly and decisively. The pieces can always be picked up afterward." "Of course. Forgive my ignorance, Master Bias, but how precisely was the damage caused?" The old man smiled. "You can understand that we do not share the secrets of our order with just anyone, and I am afraid that I already have an apprentice." He indicated the unconvincing youth. "We met. In simple terms, then, perhaps, that I might understand." "You would call it magic." "Magic. I see. Indeed, it is, after all, what we Magi are best known for." I don't suppose you would be kind enough to demonstrate for my benefit."
Choose wisely.
"Oh, no." The so-called wizard gave a comfortable laugh. "I don't do tricks." This old fool is as hard to fathom as the Northman. The one barely speaks, while the other talks and talks, but says nothing. I must admit to being somewhat at a loss as to how this intruder got in. Lector glanced round the room, examining the possible means of entrance. The guard saw nothing, which leaves the window. He shuffled cautiously to the hole and peered out. There had been a small balcony, but a few stubby splinters of stone were all that remained. Otherwise the wall fell smooth and sheer all the way to the glittering water far, far below. "That's quite a climb to make, especially in a dress. An impossible one, wouldn't you say? How do you think this woman made it?" The old man snorted. "Do you want me to do your job for you?" "Perhaps she clambered up the latrine chute." The Northman looked deeply troubled by that suggestion. "Why don't you catch her and ask her? Isn't that what you're here for?" Touchy, and consummately acted. An air of injured innocence so convincing he almost has me believing this garbage. Almost, but not quite. Therein lies the problem. There is no sign of your mysterious intruder. No body has been recovered. Some wood, small pieces of furniture, the stones from a wall, they were scattered widely in the streets below. But nothing of any intruder, of either sex. The old man stared back at him, a hard frown beginning to form on his face. Perhaps the body burned to nothing. Perhaps it was torn apart into pieces too small to see, or boiled away into the air. Magic is not always precise or predictable, even in the hands of a master. Such things can happen, easily, particularly when I become annoyed. I fear I must risk your annoyance, though. It has occurred to me that you might not in fact be Bias, the first of the Magi. Indeed. The old man's bushy eyebrows drew together. I must at least entertain the possibility, a tense stillness had settled on the room, that you are an impostor. A fraud? Snapped the so-called Magus. The pale young man lowered his head and backed quietly away towards the wall. Lector felt suddenly very alone in the midst of that rubble-strewn circle, alone and increasingly unsure of himself, but he soldiered on.
It had occurred to me that this whole event might have been staged for our benefit, a convenient demonstration of your magical powers."
"Convenient?"
hissed the bald old man, his voice unnaturally loud.
"Convenient, say you? It would be convenient if I was left to enjoy a night's sleep uninterrupted. Convenient if I was now sitting in my old chair on the closed council. Convenient if people took my word as law the way they used to, without asking a lot of damn fool questions."
The resemblance to the statue on the Kingsway was suddenly much increased. There now was the frown of command, the sneer of contempt, the threat of terrible anger. The old man's words seemed to press on Glocter like a great weight, driving the breath from his body, threatening to crush him to his knees, cutting into his skull and leaving behind a creeping shred of doubt. He glanced up at the yawning hole in the wall. Powder? Catapults? Labourers? Is there not a simpler explanation? The world seemed to shift around him, as it had in the Arch-Lector's study a few days before. His mind turned the pieces, pulling them apart, putting them together. What if they are simply telling the truth? What if... No. Glocter forced the idea from his mind. He lifted his head and gave the old man a sneer of his own to think about. An aging actor with a shaved head and a plausible manner. Nothing more. If you are, as you say, you have nothing to fear from my questions or from your answers. The old man cracked a smile, and the strange pressure was suddenly released. Your candour, at least, Inquisitor, is quite refreshing. No doubt you will do your utmost to prove your theory. I wish you luck. I, as you say, have nothing to fear. I would only ask that you find some proof of this deception before bothering us again. Glocter bowed stiffly. I will try to do so, he said, and made for the door. There is one more thing. The old man was looking towards the gaping hole in the wall. Would it be possible to find some other chambers? The wind blows rather chill through these. I will look into it. Good. Perhaps somewhere with fewer steps? Damn things play hell with my knees these days. Indeed. There at least we can agree. Glocter gave the three of them one last inspection. The bald old man stared back, his face a blank wall. The lanky youth glanced up anxiously, then quickly turned away. The Northman was still frowning towards the latrine door. Charlatans, impostors, spies. But how to prove it? Good day, gentlemen. And he limped towards the stairs with as much dignity as he could muster. Chapter 29. Nobility.